Hello, my name is Kirioth, and today we are going to talk about another sort of weird Primarch rumour that is floating around. And to be honest, it's something that's been floating around for a while, or at least part of it. And the part that's been floating around for a while is the idea of more Primaris stuff, basically. That we're going to get more skimmers, there's going to be a version of Primaris bikers, that there's going to be some close combat variation of Primaris, which actually has proper melee loadouts. That has been floating around for a while. In fact, we've talked about that stuff before on the channel. And to be honest, whilst I did think initially with the announcement of Shadowspear, oh, that's what this is pointing to, we haven't actually seen any of the stuff that these rumours have been talking about. And they've been pretty consistent for a good few months now. I'm not even sure how long they've been sort of floating around. But they've kept resurfacing, they've kept coming back. Now, over the last couple of days, this has been expanded on with the idea that there'll be a chapter that gets its own codex. A chapter that currently has no codex will receive one in the near future. And that's where it starts to get a little bit interesting. I'd seen a few of these things, and I'd kind of been like, I can, maybe, okay, sure. But then that got expanded on even more by someone who contacted me. Now, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh yes, 100%. You know the drill. It could be absolute bollocks of the highest order. I don't know. I cannot verify this independently. All I know is that this person is saying that something is going to happen that, frankly, a lot of people are saying right now. So that could be an indication that they're in fact onto something. It could also be an indication that right now quite a lot of people are wrong. It is a rumour. It is unsubstantiated, insubstantiated, whatever that word is. Take it or leave it, essentially. So the general feeling is that there will be a new codex for a chapter that has not yet had a codex. They've never had a codex of their own, and there will be a bunch of new Primaris stuff in it. Now, the extra bit that I've been told is that the chapter getting their own codex will be Imperial Fists, and Rogal Dorn will be making a return. That's interesting to me. That apparently around June/July, that kind of area, is when this might drop, if it's true, which it may well not be. I can't really overstate this enough. Buckets of salt, oceans worth of salt, you know the deal. But we're going to talk about that a little bit, because that's interesting to me for a few different reasons. I mean, firstly, of all the Loyalist Primarchs to come back, I would have pegged any Loyalist Primarch that doesn't have their own codex, and isn't dead, obviously, would not be in the running for the first to come back. When you look at who we have available for the Loyalist side of things, when it comes to restocking the Loyalist side of the Primarch pool, we've already got Leman Russ, and we've already got Lionel Johnson. I mean, those two are primed to come back at pretty much any point. Leman Russ could literally just show up out of nowhere and go, oh yeah, I just came out of the warp. And the response would be, well, where the fuck have you been? That would be it. There'd be no kind of questioning about it. It makes sense that he would return, and frankly, it feels like he's overdue at this point, given everything that's been happening. Likewise with Lionel Johnson, we know that he's sleeping. We know that he's not actually dead. He's not a corpse. He's not had it. He's essentially available. He's just got the world's worst alarm clock because he never ever wakes the fuck up. And so him coming back, again, would be fairly easy, fairly simple. He wakes up, he stands up, and he's like, what the fuck is going on here? And off we go. We have a new Primarch for the Loyalists. Rogal Dorn is not someone I would have pegged. His fate is relatively mysterious. He doesn't have, mind you, I say he doesn't have an easy way back in. Really, I guess if he does return, it would be the same way that Leman Russ would, in that he just would show up and be like, I was in the warp, sorry about that. It'd be an easy way to fix it. Obviously, prefer to make it a lot more interesting for him, but I guess it wouldn't be too tricky to bring him back. I just wouldn't have pegged him as being the one to return. And when it comes to bringing back a Loyalist Primarch, I would view Leman Russ and Lionel Johnson specifically as the easy route, because they have their own codexes. Dark Angels have their own codex, Space Wolves have their own codex. They are still Space Marines, they still fall under that umbrella, but they have a lot of different unique stuff. They have different organisational structures for their chapters. It would be a lot easier I would think, to fold a Primarch into either one of those separate codexes. When you look at like Codex Space Marines, it's not quite the same, is it? You've got a whole range of very different chapters that have very different methods of waging war, all piled into this one book. With the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, their structures are so different, and their chapter organisation is so different, that it would literally be a case of, oh, and now there's a Primarch. When you look at the way the Codex Space Marines is actually broken up, and the way all the different chapters work, throwing in another Primarch into that book as well as Guilliman, I know it sounds weird, actually seems like it'd be a bit more tricky. Now, this is where I think the idea of a chapter getting a new codex comes in, because, of course, you don't have the problem of suddenly having to give another chapter in the Space Marines Codex as much kind of page space as the Ultramarines and Guilliman if they have their own codex. The thing that makes that weird is, how would Imperial Fists be different? As it stands, they are... I mean, they do not diverge sufficiently from the Codex Astartes to warrant their own codex, effectively. They might not fight the same as the Ultramarines, or the Iron Hands, or the White Scars, or any of that, but they still fall... I think it's fair to say they still fall within the kind of the same general organisational structure. They still fall within that kind of overall umbrella. They are not like the Space Wolves or the Dark Angels. They don't have that same thing. The only reason I'm not including Blood Angels in this, by the way, is because Sanguinius is dead. So that's why I'm not including them, because there would be an interesting amount of storytelling going into Sanguinius coming back, whereas Dark Angels, Space Wolves, they are the easiest ones, I think. So that's clearly where the idea of a new codex coming out for a chapter that's never had one, I think that is probably something that is to do with it, because having Guilliman and Rogal Dorn in the same codex would surely bloat that codex out. It would make things a bit weird, because then you'd have two chapters that have a significant, like, I don't know how to phrase it, almost like a different power structure in a sense. Whereas at the moment that really doesn't have that effect. There isn't really that issue, because there's only Guilliman, and frankly all chapters are doing what Guilliman says, more or less, to a certain extent. Rogal Dorn would very much muddy those waters and make that codex a bit weird in structure in the way it works. So Imperial Fists getting their own codex to line up with the reveal of Rogal Dorn, the return of Rogal Dorn, in that way it does make sense. The bits that I'm struggling with, there's a couple of things, right? There's a couple of things. Firstly, how different would you make an Imperial Fist Codex to a general Space Marines Codex, is the first thing. As far as I know, and as far as I can tell, and unless anything massive has changed, or I just somehow have completely failed to read the latest Codex sufficiently, Imperial Fists are not running around with the same kind of technological differences that the Dark Angels or the Space Wolves are. They're not running around with the same kind of organisational changes that the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels are. They just don't have that same mentality. They are not that same kind of chapter. They slot very neatly into Codex Space Marines because they are a pretty much compliant Space Marine chapter. What would you do to separate them? Would Rogal Dorn have to show up and go, okay, all of this shit, I'm not having this. We're creating different squad. I mean, would it be closer to the standard tactical Marine side of things? Would Imperial Fist have the ability to mix things like Intercessors and Hellblasters together to form a kind of Primaris tactical squad, rather than having set roles for each? If you did that, then surely that would just mean that you are infringing on the Deathwatch Codex. So is that even likely? When it comes to just the way they wage war, what could you put in that codex that would be sufficiently different to Codex Space Marines? Like, would they have extra units suddenly? And how would that work? Like, how would you introduce a bunch of extra units for Imperial Fists that the rest of the chapters don't get, that the rest of the Space Marines don't get, that the rest of the Primaris chapters don't get? With the way it's worked out with, like, Space Wolves and Dark Angels, and I'll say Blood Angels as well, even though Sanguinius obviously is not going to come back anytime soon, and that's where they've been excluded so far. with the other separate codexes, there are significant technological differences, there are organisational differences, structural differences. They have access to stuff that the other Space Marine chapters don't. You know, there's God knows how much plasma and archaeotech bullshit going on with the Dark Angels. There is all the Hellfrost stuff. There's wolves galore for the Space Wolves, obviously. The Blood Angels have got, you know, entirely different sets of dreadnoughts and the Sanguinary Guard and all of that stuff. They have mostly through just almost force of habit. Not like, you could probably fold them in if you really wanted to, but they haven't been. They are sufficiently different. Imperial Fists don't have any of that legacy. They don't have any of that, whether it be in lore or on the tabletop, they don't have any of that significant departure to draw on. So, Rogal Dorn coming back, and then suddenly the Imperial Fist getting a bunch of shiny new shit that the rest of Primaris don't get, that seems incredibly unlikely, because, I mean, that's just taking stuff away that didn't even exist before from chapters that otherwise would have been able to use it if it wasn't for Rogal Dorn coming back. Does Rogal Dorn return with some sort of technology that he's found? Perhaps he's been working on his own stuff whilst he's been away. Like, is he going to introduce new methods of waging war that don't actually require the Primaris? Would it be like almost a kind of a steer away from the Primaris, where we see more emphasis on standard Marines? I mean, it's possible, but that seems unlikely as well, because Primaris are the new poster boys. They are the things that Games Workshop is focusing on the most. It's weird. It's a weird thing, because I can see where it makes sense. Because it would be a lot easier to, in a way, to make Imperial Fists and Rogal Dorn their own thing, as opposed to them being folded into an overall Space Marines Codex, because there is, right now, a very clear power structure. I mean, Guilliman is at the top, and then everyone else is below him, is basically how that's working out. With the introduction of Rogal Dorn, that adds in an extra element, which should be interesting story-wise, but also has this kind of weird foggying effect, where it makes things a little bit more unclear as to who the authority is. I mean, maybe that's going to be part of the story. Rogal Dorn is wondering why the fuck Guilliman is in charge. I mean, the obvious answer being he's the only one around at this point, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I'm going to be totally honest. I do think we are going to end up with more Primaris stuff. That bit isn't up for debate. I mean, of course we are. That range will be expanded, probably endlessly, and we will slowly see the kind of gradual replacement of existing standard Space Marine squads with Primaris equivalents, because Primaris are the new standard. That's just how that is. I can see Rogal Dorn coming back. That would throw up some interesting story elements, and it would throw up an interesting kind of contrast between him and Guilliman, and whether there's some sort of power struggle there could be fun to see. Imperial Fists getting their own codex, I can see why it would make sense in the context of Rogal Dorn's chapter gets their own space, book-wise. But rules-wise, I don't know how that's going to work, because I don't know how you would make Imperial Fist sufficiently different to every other chapter without severely altering the way they work as a chapter, or introducing a bunch of stuff that no one else has access to, which would feel a little bit forced, if I'm honest. If Rogal Dorn just showed them was like, here's a bunch of new shit that we can use, but no one else gets it, that would feel really odd. Like, that would feel very disjointed, and I don't know. It's genuinely a weird one. A weird one. But it's floating around, and someone, sent me a bit of extra information on top of what I'd already read and been sent. So I'm just throwing it over to you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think there's any merit to it? Do you think there's anything in there that sounds like it could be plausible or feasible? Does it just sound like a load of old shit? Just let me know what you think, because as I say, I'm presenting it to you under the banner of I don't fucking know. So let me know what you think. In the meantime, feel free to click all the things, Patreon video, subscribe, all of that stuff. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to, and I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.